I should make a list of all the people that I hated when I was a Republican. Because the two people I'm going to talk about are two people that I hated when I was a Republican. It's very funny. Like, that I'm so interested in them now and don't hate them at all.
Yeah.
That would be a crazy thing to talk about.
We should do a episode of, like, you growing up in a very religious household.
Conservative household.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be an intense one.
And then I'll talk about, like, my background. I mean, mine's not as cool as yours. Like,
I think yours is really cool.
Well, I think yours is, like I said, it takes a really strong person and very intelligent person to look at themselves and be like, ooh, I've been wrong my whole life. And then to not only change your mind, but, like, change your entire, like, being and, like, what you stand for. That is so brave and, like, really, it's one of the coolest, like, I think that's one of the biggest things that made me fall in love with you.
Aww. Thank you, sweetheart.
It's true.
I love you.
Like, it really takes a very intelligent and amazing person to look at themselves and, like, look in the mirror and, like, come face to face with that and be like, I need to change. And then actually change, like, putting your money where your mouth is. That's the biggest thing that made me fall in love with you.
I think I just, like, I always thought you're just, like, such a genuinely, like, good person from, like, your very birth. And of course you would have, like, always been somebody who cared about people and gave a shit about people and was never an asshole.
Yeah, but I can be self-righteous sometimes.
Okay. That compared to, like, how I was when I was younger is hardly a sin.
I mean, listen, I wasn't always great. I made fun of people. I was definitely racist at some points in my life because I grew up in a fucking white household.
Yeah, but, like, that's what I mean. Like, you grew up in that, just like we all did, as fucking white people in America. And, like, you never let it, like, even come close to changing you as a person. Like, it was all around you, and you rose above it.
Thank you, baby. Oh, my God. For those two white people that are like, we're so great.
Yay, us.
Yay, us.
Bare
White people for the win.
minimum.
Bare minimum. I'm a CEO. Anyways.
I deserve this.
I deserve this. Where's my cappuccino?
Where is it? Where is it?
Where's my Starbs? Anyways. Hello.
Hello, all.
Welcome back to All That Worked for Nothing.
With Dorio.
And Shane. So, since the death of former President Jimmy Carter, we thought it would be a perfect opportunity to do a whole podcast on Rosalynn Carter and Jimmy Carter, their legacy. I think Shane has a little bit of a mystery for us.
Yes, today's story is going to be a mystery.
I love that. I'm excited.
Yeah, and then you're going to be talking about Rosalynn Carter.
Yes.
And we had to get that right because I think my whole life I've called her Rosalynn Carter, but
yes.
Yeah.
It is definitely Rosalynn, and I definitely also said Rosalynn for most of my life as well. So in keeping with tradition, women first, and we're going to talk about Rosalynn. See, I almost said Rosalynn again. Yikes, man.
I mean, I do have to think Rosalynn Carter, because Rosalynn Carter just comes right to me. I would feel so bad having a name like that.
In my notes, I literally have the phonetic spelling of her name, because I knew I was going to forget how to say it. Rosalynn.
See, I should feel that way, because I have a name that people always want to call Sean.
True.
Yeah. I have a name just like that. People are just instinctually drawn to the wrong version of my name.
I have a made-up name, so people literally call me the wrong name all the time. So I'm used to it, honestly. All right, so Rosalynn Carter. I'm going to start with her early years. She was born Eleanor Rosalynn Smith on August 18th, 1927 in Plains, Georgia. She was the daughter to a farmer who also owned the first auto shop in the country, and her mother, who was a college graduate and homemaker, both instilled in her strong religious values and the value of hard work. Her father passed away from leukemia when she was only 13, and her mother began working as a dressmaker for the first time. And this is where Rosalynn had to take charge of caring for the household chores and her siblings. And she gives a lot of credit to why she kind of turned into the person that she did at a very young age because of this reason. She graduated from college in 1946. The same year, she married Jimmy Carter, who at the time was a naval officer. She describes their early married years as a coming of age, raising 3 kids primarily alone while Jimmy was mostly aboard ship. She does talk about this period of time, though, very fondly. When I was listening to her oral history, she was saying that this time period really gave her the strength to be independent, and like it gave her that like confidence in herself that she could get anything done.
Yeah.
So she didn't look at this period of time as like a bad thing that her husband was gone. I mean, she did miss him a lot.
Yeah.
But it did give her like a sense of like importance that I don't think she really ever had before.
Yeah, I mean, I think she was probably in a very unique situation for her time.
Yeah.
She was basically doing the role of a single parent, but she wasn't a single parent.
Right.
When there was hardly any single parents around.
Oh, another fun fact, too, is that she was talking about how after the babies were born, Jimmy would take time off. And that was unheard of back then. So they'd be like, wait. Because she was saying that, like, back then, when the mother would give birth, she was not expected to be seen for 2 weeks. So what was expected was either the mother-in-law or your mother, most likely your mother, was supposed to come and help you with the baby and like changing the diapers and feeding, waking up with them. And then Jimmy, like her mother would come and help, but Jimmy also took 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
And he would actually come and help, and she was saying that people thought that was weird, and she was like, why? Like, I need help.
Yeah.
I just birthed a child.
Like, he can take 2 weeks off. It's funny. I definitely think of the Navy as like my kid was born, light up a cigar, and like keep playing with the boys kind of attitude.
Right.
So yeah, the fact that he did that is like, it kind of goes to show you that like both of them had very good priorities.
Yes, exactly.
Like, and then like that kind of shows later in life.
Yeah, exactly. And they had like a true partnership.
Yes, that's something I hear all over the place, was how good they were as like partners in everything they did.
Absolutely. So they had 3 sons. They were all born at different naval ports. John William Carter, Jack, was born in Norfolk, Virginia. James Earl Carter III, Chip, was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. Donald Jeffrey Carter, Jeff, was born in New London, Connecticut. And then 15 years later, they had Amy Lynn Carter, who was born in Plains, Georgia. Because at this point, he was out of the Navy. So Carter left the Navy after the death of his father to run the family business, which we all know is famously the peanut business. He was a peanut farmer, amongst other things.
Right. He was a pretty successful farmer.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny how big of an export peanuts were, which, I mean, totally makes sense. But yeah, I did not know there was a Plains, Georgia until I studied Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
Didn't know there were plains in Georgia.
I mean, right. It's a very small town.
Yeah.
Rosalynn was very adamant about getting out of Plains, Georgia, and we'll see how she reacts to coming back after his presidency a little bit later. Mm-hmm. So Carter left the Navy after the death of his father to run the family business. Rosalynn worked alongside him, helping with the organization and bookkeeping end. She got her first view into the political world when her husband ran for Senate in 1962, which he won after exposing a stuffed ballot box. Rosalynn, normally shy and an anxious public speaker, became very involved in his subsequent re-election campaigns, including his bid for governor in Georgia in 1966 and 1970. For his presidential election in 1976 and 1980, she worked full-time on a separate schedule on his campaign, so they weren't seeing each other. She was working days, he was working nights, they'd swap, but they were covering ground. During her stint as Georgia's First Lady, she passionately worked on fighting against the stigma of mental illness and reworking the state's mental health care system, while also acting as liaison for civic groups and using her influence to advance the immunization of children. She later credits this work as what prepared her for the White House. Her mental health program established 134 community mental health centers. Because the stigma was so bad, her task force only had 5 advocates in Georgia. Isn't that crazy?
That is crazy.
But in all of Georgia, she had 5 people advocating for this mental health care reform.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it all the time, mental health really has just been started to take seriously in the last decade, honestly.
I would say definitely in the last decade.
Yeah, so everything that came before that, we're going to talk a little bit more about in my story just how much of a different time it was if you were somebody struggling with mental health, and how how little support you really had and how you were viewed in society was so different. Like, we're very fortunate that things have just started to, like, turn around. But it's, like, a big boat that you got to turn, so it's going to take a while.
I mean, yeah, I don't think that I comfortably talked about my mental health and well-being until, I would say, I was in my early to mid-20s.
Yeah.
Like, the stigma was definitely still alive and well until my mid-20s, and I feel like just now it's starting to really start to kind of change, and people are, getting way better help with their mental issues now. So there's still a long way to go, but
yeah.
It is much, much better than it was back in this time.
I was, like, in total denial until my mid-20s, for sure.
I feel like we all are.
Yeah.
We all think that life isn't going to fuck us up, and then all of a sudden we're like, oh,
yeah,
I definitely went through trauma. Shit, I should probably deal with this. I definitely did that. I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD officially until I was 26 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember my doctor being like, didn't you ever see, like, any signs or anything? And I'm like, the signs were there. They absolutely were there, but, like, I just thought I was stupid. Like, I just was like, I don't know, I just wanted to be normal, when you're in middle school and high school, you just want to fit in, you just want to be normal. And, like, I already have type 1 diabetes, like, I'm already different in that way, so I just was like, I just want to be a normal kid, okay?
Yeah.
I don't want to, like, have another kind of fucking obstacle that I have to, face in my life. Like, I just want to go to school, be really distracted, get bad grades, and then figure out that I'm just stupid.
Yeah. And I think,
or, like, I don't care about school.
And I think the way, like, we're kind of, like, socially, like, our way of dealing with problems is, like, it just takes, like, a very simple fix to fix you just need to change your perspective. You just need to do this. Everyone, like, tries to quick fix a lot of things, and people will do anything to make it that they don't have a mental health problem.
Yeah.
And it's like what Rosalynn Carter was talking about. It's just such a huge stigma. You just automatically make you feel, like, different and a burden to people. And it's sad.
Exactly. I think it's my humble opinion that everyone has some sort of trauma. Mm-hmm. Like, life sucks for, like, pretty much everyone unless you're fucking rich. But even then, money can't buy happiness.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're a human being and you have a brain, you most likely have something going on up there and you need some help at some point. You know what I mean? So, like, no one can escape the mental shit. No.
I mean, it's like a doctor for any other part of your body. You need a doctor for your teeth and a doctor for your heart, and you need a doctor for your head. Exactly.
And even if you think nothing's wrong with you, absolutely you should at least try to go to therapy and figure out maybe you can talk through something. I don't know. Like, childhood kind of sucks sometimes,
Yeah. If you have nothing wrong with you, then it should be a quick session.
And at least you gave it the old college try.
Exactly.
Anyways, let's get back to this. The lifelong work that Rosalynn did fighting against the stigma of mental health is a huge reason why mental health became mainstream today. People never talked about it or knew where to go for help, and because of the work she did, that stigma is becoming less and less as time goes on and access to mental health grows. So while she was in the White House, Rosalynn upheld the traditional role of First Lady while also working tirelessly to create a more caring society. She was the first presidential spouse to carry a briefcase to a White House office on a daily basis. She became the honorary chair of the President's Commission on Mental Health, which allowed her to hold hearings around the country, testify before Congress, and pass the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980. The key provisions of this were to the expansion of community mental health centers, focus on prevention and early intervention, improved services for underserved populations, patient rights and protections expanded. So it did a lot of great things. And then here's a fun fact for you. And as we know, fun facts in history are not normally fun. They're just tragic truths.
Oh, I kind of like that.
It's a tragic truth.
It's a tragic truth.
So when Reagan took over in 1980, he cut the funding for these programs, which led to a decline of availability to these services.
Yep. Reagan never had a program he didn't like to cut.
Yep.
Except Social Security.
She worked on improving access to mental health care for the rest of her life. She traveled extensively overseas, promoting her own projects and the president's policies. She made a history-making trip to Latin America in 1977, representing the United States government, visiting with several heads of state, sharing her husband's view on human rights, and helping to enhance democracy in our hemisphere. She was the first Lady to address the World Health Organization in Geneva, Switzerland. She lobbied for her support of the Equal Rights Amendment. She raised tens of millions of dollars in aid for Cambodian refugees. She brought together 23 organizations to develop solutions for the elderly. Immunizing kids against preventable diseases was her lifelong specialty. That had a far reach while in the White House. By 1981, more than 95% of school-age children were immunized against these preventable diseases and made vaccinations a routine health practice. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. She did so much for health. Think
about this. This is by 1981, so this is like the beginning of millennials. So the beginning of the millennial generation, our generation.
Yeah.
It was just now starting to be like a thing that we are getting inoculated as babies.
As like at a consistent rate,
yes. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Like people are still alive today.
Yeah.
From this time period. Like it's just crazy to think that it's really not that long ago.
It really isn't that long ago. Like we're gonna talk about it, but like a lot of how our world is shaped today is from our old, not even like our parents' generation, like our older brothers and sisters' generation. Yeah. Like this is like close to my older sister's time.
Yes. Yeah. I was gonna say like your sister was born around this time period.
Yeah. Like so it's really, really not that far away.
Yeah. Throughout her husband's years in office, Rosalynn was seen as his most fervent and effective supporter and was widely seen as the more popular one amongst the two of them. In an interview, she was quoted saying she had more interest in being popular and winning. And then she was quoted saying, "I have to say that he had the courage to tackle the important issues," which I think is really sweet. It's very, like, partner-y.
It is very partner-y.
Yeah.
It's what you would want, like... It's what you want the most important person in your life to say about you.
So, after Jimmy lost his bid for a second presidential term in what she called involuntary retirement...
I love that line.
Yeah. They went back to Plains with their work as a couple expanding. They founded the Carter Center in 1982 in Atlanta, a non-governmental organization that helped struggling people in the United States and abroad, working to expand human rights and alleviate suffering. Through the foundation, the Carters circled the globe in non-political campaigns, many times in order to eradicate guinea worm disease and other tropical diseases. They increased agricultural production in Africa. They monitored elections in young democracies, urged compliance with international human rights standards, and they resolved conflicts. Whew. Man, they have, like, such extensive careers.
It's amazing, their post-presidency
Like, did they
careers.
Ever go to sleep? That's what I'd like to know. Especially Rosalynn. Oh, my God, that woman. She was a dynamo.
I think they just, like, had to keep moving. They always were doing something. And I think that's a lot easier to do when you find the person who is your partner.
Rosalynn established the Carter Center's mental health program to continue her work, destigmatizing and combating discrimination towards people with mental health disorders in the United States and abroad. She chaired the Carter Center Mental Health Task Force, a group of individuals who could affect public policy. She hosted an annual gathering of mental health leaders to gauge policy issues regarding mental health care. She established Rosalynn Carter Fellowships for Mental Health Journalism in order to gather accurate, in-depth reporting on mental health issues. She also did extensive work with helping the families of people dealing with an aging loved one or mental illness, and in 1987 she established the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregivers at Georgia Southwestern State University. To help caregivers, the institute began by helping caregivers in Georgia, but today they help over 40 million people throughout the United States. She started the Every Child by Two campaign, which is what we were just talking about, and helped get newborns vaccinated across the world. She established more care for those who were dying, helped women's rights campaigns, and along with her husband, she helped build thousands of houses with Habitat for Humanity for 30 years. She was a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2001, among many, many other awards throughout her lifelong career. When asked how she would like to be remembered, she answered, "I would like for people to think that I took advantage of the opportunities I had and did the best I could." I think that pretty much sums up Rosalynn Carter very well.
To say the least,
I mean,
sure.
seriously, like I said, did she sleep?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Like, she did so much good work.
Yeah.
Like, decades and decades of good work.
Yeah.
Like, she really is the exception. Her and Jimmy Carter are the exception that, like, the assholes live forever.
Right.
Because they are the kind of people who deserved a long life.
Well, I think it's a lot to do with just they were constantly moving. And one of the biggest things that a lot of people think that allows people to have a longer life is constantly having something to work towards and feeling like you're working towards something good or that you are needed in that aspect. So I think that Rosalynn definitely had that kind of like drive, and it was something to get her out of bed every morning.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of people say, like when you have a longer life, it's more so people that just, they have something that gets them out of bed in the morning and they feel as if they don't show up, then no one else will do the job, you know, and that's what kept her going.
And I think like people like underestimate her like instincts in politics. The story I found when I was listening to the audiobook where a lot of this part of the podcast comes from is she drove through Florida, which first off, ugh. Yeah. It's like Florida in the 70s.
Oh my gosh.
I can only imagine what she saw.
Did they even have like AC back then?
Oh, I doubt it. I doubt a lot of people had AC.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably really rough. But she spent 70 days driving through Florida in the 70s, and she didn't have like an itinerary or schedule or anything like that. She just drove through the state and would go to the courthouse, and she would always assume there was something going down at the courthouse and talk to people and get Jimmy Carter's name out. So she'd just drive from town to town. There's probably a town with an alligator mayor, because again, this is Florida in the 70s.
So what was so important about Florida?
Florida, weirdly, like before, like Iowa was like the big thing, because Jimmy Carter actually changed that and made Iowa really important by going there first. Because before, people didn't like go to primaries until you got to like the really big states. Mm-hmm. They're like the reason why like New Hampshire and Iowa and all these states are kind of important really took place like in the 70s, like really with Jimmy Carter and then later with Reagan. But Florida was a popular, like it was a very populous state that had an early primary, and it was in the South, so Jimmy Carter like had to win the South. He's from the state above it. So Florida was a state that had a really high population, so it was worth a lot of delegates. So it was early on in the campaign season, I guess you want to say. So it was also Southern, and Jimmy Carter was Southern, so he needed to win this state. And Rosalynn Carter drove through Florida in the 70s, 70 days, going from place to place, getting his name out because people didn't know who Jimmy Carter was early on in the campaign. So she would go to courthouses. She'd also find radio towers. So she would just go and find a radio tower and be like, oh, must be a radio station there. Ask to get interviewed and get the chance to talk about Jimmy Carter.
And she did this with her daughter, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the two of them...
Who was, 10 at the time?
Yes, because I know she was still a child when they made it to the White House.
Yeah.
So she just had incredible political instincts because that was all just her. And he won Florida handily. He beat the enemy of the podcast, George Wallace. So George Wallace... Or wait, what's that? Strom Thurmond. They all are terrible. We'll talk about Strom Thurmond later, too.
Oh, God.
Anyway, so George Wallace was in a wheelchair at this point because he had gotten shot. And this was his last chance to try to make anything out of his career. And he lost to Jimmy Carter in Florida. Carter took off, and Wallace, I don't think, ever ran for office again. Thank God. But yeah.
Good riddance.
But yeah, this is a huge win for him. And to have somebody like Rosalynn Carter that can be that independent, like we were talking about earlier, and produce so much with so little is all instincts. And just, she had that so naturally.
No, she really did. And I think a lot of us are kind of finding out now, or, I mean, I don't know. Shane and I talk about this all the time. We always think that the first lady would have been a better president than their husband.
It happens a lot. I would say a lot of the time.
Yeah.
I can think of just a few examples just from the 20th century. So, Rosalynn Carter is a prime example of that. Because
she did have amazing instincts. She knew like what would win, and Jimmy was seen as very hard-headed.
Yes.
And if he didn't like it, even though he knew if he knew it was a good idea, but if he didn't like it, he wouldn't. It took him a long time for you to like turn his head.
And then what was that other thing we heard in that documentary where the quickest way for him not to like something is by saying it would be politically helpful to do it.
Yes.
So like saying that would help you politically was a way for him to not like it. And he's just, that rigidness and that hard-headedness was kind of his downfall.
Yes, he was very hard to work with. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that if Rosalynn had the chance, if she was born in a different time period and was able to really go for a political career, I think that she would have killed it as a politician. But like, because she actually cared about people. She would have been a politician that actually wanted to make change and not someone who wanted to, get their name out there and just, get lobbyists to give them money. Yeah,
get rich and famous.
Exactly.
Yeah. She is not the Hollywood for ugly people type.
Right, exactly.
Have you ever heard that?
I have heard that,
That's such a spot on line. But no, she almost ran, people wanted her to run for governor in 1984, 86, I think, and she said no. And it's really kind of a tragedy, because I think she would have absolutely crushed that job.
Yeah, she absolutely would have. All right, honey, you want to take it away?
Let's do it. The same way we talked about Reagan's presidency through his interactions with his enemies, we're going to do the same thing with late President Jimmy Carter.
Yes.
And the enemy we're going to talk about is Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy.
Boom, boom, boom.
So in an interview in 60 Minutes in 2010, a year after Kennedy died, Carter said, "The fact is, we would have had comprehensive health care now if it had not been for Ted Kennedy deliberately blocking the legislation I proposed in 1978 or 79. Carter continued, "It was Kennedy's fault. He killed the bill." But is that true? Could we have major healthcare reform 50 years ago if it hadn't been for Ted Kennedy? And did he block this bill and kill our chances of having better healthcare because he wanted to be president? Let me take you back to a time of inflation, debates over healthcare, and Kennedy's being relevant. Something we can't relate to today at all.
Yeah, definitely not.
And today, we're going to solve a mystery. Did Ted Kennedy kill healthcare? Well, first, we need to talk about our victim. What is the bill that Carter was talking about in that interview? And as far as I can tell, in June 1979, Jimmy Carter proposed a legislation that would have combined Medicaid, which if you don't know is healthcare for people who can't afford healthcare, and Medicare, which is healthcare for people 65 and up, into one big program called the healthcare program. And they would have had to do things like accept physicians' fees, like right up front. Healthcare is really complicated. I mean, obviously, like, curing people is complicated. Financing it is also really complicated. So I'm going to try to keep it simple. So basically, he would have combined the two versions of like government healthcare into one big program. And he would have had like a national maximum payment. Mm-hmm. So if you had a bill over $2,500, and that's if you were like the wealthiest person, they'd cover everything over that. So you'd pay money into a fund, and the fund would help you out. And there was some other money that would help out with Medicare, Medicaid, and some preventative programs. But it wasn't like, it was comprehensive, but it wasn't like government-run healthcare. It was really done to help out like private health insurance companies and kind of look like healthcare. So Carter made a few different proposals during this time, but as far as I can tell, this is the comprehensive plan that he was talking about in 2010 that got killed. According to Carter, the bill had the support of the Senate Finance Chair, which is a guy named Senator Russell Long of Louisiana, 3 critical members of the House committees, and then the Senate Subcommittee on Health's chairman, which was Ted Kennedy. But at the last minute, Kennedy withdrew his support and the bill died. But why would Kennedy do that? And who is Ted Kennedy?
Oh, I can't wait to find out.
So, he's not JFK. He's not RFK. He's TEK. Wait, no. TMK. I forget what his middle name was. It's like Marlin or something like that. Something weird. But Edward Kennedy, or Ted Kennedy, was practically the opposite of Jimmy Carter. Whereas Carter's life was run according to a strict discipline, Kennedy's was a life of indulgence. He's often the forgotten son of Patrick Kennedy's 4 boys. When it came to making crucial decisions in his life, Ted was always reminded of one important thing. He was a Kennedy. Even the decision to run for the Senate seat in Massachusetts might have been more of his father's idea than his own. The seat was vacated because of his brother's election, after all, and Joe Kennedy wanted to see that seat stay within the family. Ted was often seen as the screw-up. He was the unserious one. He got kicked out of Harvard because he paid another student to take a test for him, and then his dad had to get him back into Harvard. He won the Senate seat despite being, quite honestly, very underqualified. He got attacked for it by his opponent, but he won anyway because of his family name. However, by the first year of his second term in the Senate, both his brothers and his father would be dead. Kennedy's life seemed lost at this point. He had a major scandal in July of 1969 when he was at a party during the moon landing. He gave one of his brother's campaign staffers and speechwriters, a woman named Mary Jo Kopechne, a ride home, and apparently got lost along the way and ended up taking a wrong turn, ended up in a river, and he escaped, but she
ended
drowned.
up in a river.
Yeah, there's a whole... Chappaquiddick's got a whole thing attached to it. It was at Chappaquiddick, so we'll move on from there. But this essentially ruined his career. He had to give a whole speech about it. He didn't go to jail. He really got away scot-free for someone getting murdered. Or, pardon, I shouldn't say murdered. He got away scot-free for someone dying. And while he was still allowed to stay in the Senate, his chances of being president were severely damaged. His drinking and his affairs were becoming increasingly more salacious and more public. But in 1971, he found his purpose. And on the first day of the United States Senate... What?
Sorry, I was just thinking about, when you said it, he found his purpose. I was just thinking about him, in his, in his suit. And he's, putting on his tie in the morning. He's like, oh, boy!
He grabbed his little lunch pail and went off to Congress.
His wife gave him a little kiss on the forehead.
Yeah, a little pep in his step.
Yeah.
But in 1971, he found his purpose and introduced on the first day of Congress a bill for universal, single-payer health care. The last surviving son of the most powerful political family in the United States was putting all his efforts behind making health care a human right. But why would this rich boy Kennedy even care? But seriously, what made him actually care about having health care for all? He got the best health care in the world.
Right.
Well, Kennedy's family has a very, very tragic and long health history. So his sister, Rosemary, was a victim of having a lobotomy done to her. So Rosemary was always kind of considered intellectually slower at the time. So Joe Kennedy, without telling his wife, sets up an appointment for Rosemary to have a lobotomy. And if you don't know what a lobotomy is, at this point, they basically just took an ice pick and put it kind of right here.
In your frontal lobe.
In your frontal lobe. Yeah. And basically, they were trying to make people who were having violent outbursts not violent. And it would have all sorts of effects. But it did not have the wanted effect on Rosemary Kennedy, and she spent the rest of her life institutionalized. Ted saw her as a child and then didn't see her again until he was an adult. His father had a major stroke when he was younger. He talked about how the healthcare bills for not just him recovering in the hospital, but him recovering in home would have ruined any average family. Mm-hmm. He was had a hurt back and ended up being in the hospital for months. And then maybe the most tragic story is his son, when he was about 9 or 10 years old, I think, got cancer on his leg. And the story is that Ted Kennedy took his son home. They played catch in the backyard one more time. He hadn't told him that he was going to have his leg amputated. And then at the end of the night, he told him that was what he was going into the hospital the next day for. And he had to have his leg amputated, but it saved his life. So all these events changed Kennedy's perspective on healthcare. and who should receive health care, and that it should not be a privilege for rich folks like him. It should be the same as everyone. However, when Kennedy introduced this bill in 1971, it might not have been that he was inspired by all these things, because these things had happened to him throughout his life. They didn't all happen to him at once. So he didn't have some sort of revelation. He was probably more likely jumping on the bandwagon, because there were several members of Congress and the president, Richard Nixon, who introduced healthcare bills between 1970 and 71. Kennedy holds hearings. He's the head of the Senate Subcommittee on Health, so he holds hearings throughout the spring of 1971, and the report at the end is called The Healthcare Crisis in America. And again, this is 1971.
Yeah.
That we're having hearings in Congress about the healthcare crisis in America. Kennedy...
When will it end?
Not anytime soon by the sound of it. So Kennedy's plan was a universal single-payer healthcare financed through payroll taxes and also some money from other sorts of taxes. And he had the support of the United Auto Workers Union. So they set up their own institution that was a big pusher of getting people on board for universal healthcare. And then they backed Kennedy's plan. If you need a context... Elizabeth Warren, who's the current senator from Massachusetts, had a similar plan in 2020, where you would get the money from payroll taxes, and that would basically just go towards funding kind of like a Canada plan, a single-payer plan. So he tries to compromise with Nixon. They both wanted the support of the unions. Nixon didn't want the Democrats getting the advantage. Everybody kind of wanted to move and do something about healthcare. Healthcare costs were out of control. And Nixon proposes more of a Obamacare plan, an ACA plan, where everybody has to have healthcare. Employers have to give it to you if you work a certain amount of hours. And then there's sort of a marketplace that you can share. And Kennedy and Nixon come really close to reaching a compromise. Kennedy changes his bill quite a bit, but they never can. Kennedy says that this is probably one of the biggest regrets of his life, because soon after this, Nixon has to resign, and then Ford is in charge. And Nixon tries to work out a plan with Ford, but he kind of can wait Ford out. Ford's super unpopular. There's a ton of Democrats that are running for office that really supports some form of universal health care. It's all going to work out. Just wait. But nobody sees Jimmy Carter coming. Now, Jimmy Carter had really little interest in passing any sort of healthcare plan. He was a businessman, and he was going to take a businessman's attitude into the White House. And it really wasn't until the United Auto Workers threatened to withhold their endorsement unless Carter got behind some sort of national health service that he got on board and kind of agreed with a lot of the things that were in Kennedy's plan when he was running for office in 1976. So he supports a national comprehensive health care plan on the campaign trail, but he's light on the details. Kennedy accuses Carter of making some of his positions indefinite and imprecise. Despite their growing rivalry, Kennedy wanted to present Carter's name at the DNC, but was denied the ceremonial honor. And that was the first time that Kennedy hadn't been at the DNC in almost 20 years. Yes, I know.
How dare you?
The pettiness, I know. This honorary thing, and he was like, no. I swear to God, there's so much Gossip Girl in politics.
Oh, absolutely.
It is so hilarious.
Yes. I mean, you can see it, it's so bad, right now.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the pettiness.
The pettiness has been ratcheted up.
Yeah, they're literally in high school still.
I know. I mean, it would be a great musical.
And it's hey, could you guys fucking, I don't know, run the goddamn country? That would be really nice.
Well, you gotta remember, my ego not getting hurt running the country. That's how they all see it. So they have their little tiff, their little quarrel. But Kennedy still backs Carter in 76, and Carter was, a fiscally conservative, and he wanted to have a balanced budget. So when he gets into office, he doesn't really care about healthcare all that much. The UAW met with Carter's health, education, and welfare secretary, because those were all different things at that point. A guy named Joseph Califano, who helped make all the cool Great Society stuff, like Medicare and Medicaid and all the things that we depend on. But he told the UAW that they shouldn't expect a great deal of support from Carter on passing any sort of health care, and they were pretty surprised at that. So between 1970 and 1977, the total health expenditures had doubled from $74 billion to $152 billion. And as a percentage of GDP, healthcare spending had risen from 7% to 8%.
Wow.
So something needed to be done. In April, Carter tried attacking hospital bills. So the way he does this is insane. Because at this point, still today, the fact that hospitals are basically businesses that have a whole section that is just based on them growing the amount of money that they can make is insane. So Carter proposed a limit on hospital revenue growth at 9% annually. And he made this whole formula about like inflation and like hospital expenditures and them still making money, providing quality care. And he also put a limit on hospital financing at $2.5 billion and gave more power to like these regulatory bodies. So that's crazy because like financing. So like, you know, what a major corporation has a whole section for.
Right.
This is all money that could go towards helping people. And instead it's making the hospital run like a business and get the people who invest in this hospital more money.
Huh.
And speaking
that sounds really familiar.
And speaking of the people who invest in this hospital, the bill didn't pass, obviously, because it got attacked when it went to the Senate. So Ann Wexler, who worked on Carter's campaign, was a political consultant, said, at a grassroots level, the opposition was so well organized and so influential that we could never do anything to dent it. And that's because every local hospital board was the president of a bank, the president of whatever local community organizations there were, the leading lights in the religious organizations in the town, and so forth. So when it came to doing anything to stop hospitals from making more money, the people who were on the boards of these hospitals would put pressure on their local representative. And since a lot of these places, unlike the Senate, had just tiny little communities, representatives are pretty easily bought out. And that's a trick that we're going to talk about what they do later. Basically, the more responsibility you put at a smaller level, the easier those people are to buy. So by the end of 1977, Carter told Kennedy that his healthcare bill needed to be changed to include a larger role for private health insurance companies. Carter also wanted him to change the bill so it would minimize federal spending, and also that it would need to be phased in. And they did this so that it wouldn't interfere with him balancing the federal budget, which is crazy that it's something that people used to care about. Because we literally do not give a shit about balancing the federal budget.
I know.
It's so crazy that this was like a major sticking point. Oh, we gotta have a balanced budget.
Anytime, like if you were to bring up Clinton to like our parents' generation, literally, like it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. They will be like, well, he balanced the budget.
Yes.
That's all they cared about.
Whoop-de-doo.
Whoop-de-doo.
He did the books,
He kept the books and they were clean.
Nobody cares about that now. That was the last time we had a balanced budget, and you were, what, 4?
Yeah, I think so.
Just ridiculous. So this is a major thing that like he needed to have a balanced budget. So Kennedy's doing all this stuff, but Carter's dragging his feet because the midterms are coming up. So he wanted to do all this stuff, but he didn't want to touch healthcare until the midterms because if they failed, it would look bad and they would lose. So Kennedy's getting pretty sick of this at this point. So Kennedy agrees, but Carter continues to drag his feet. He doesn't want to implement anything until the midterms are over because if they fail, it would look bad and whatever. So he also wanted to pass it in sections. He didn't want to pass one bill to be phased in and actually do anything comprehensive to change healthcare. He basically just wanted to do little adjustments around the side in stages and drag it out. So Kennedy had enough. So at a speech in the 1978 midterm convention, which was in Memphis, he was part of a panel on healthcare. And weirdly enough, this was moderated by Bill Clinton. And he was in front of Joseph Califano, Carter's Secretary on Health, Education, and Welfare. And Kennedy went over his family struggles with health in the past And at the end of his speech, Kennedy pounded his fists and said that he was for that Democratic platform plank that provides decent quality health care, north, south, east, and west for all Americans as a matter of right and not a privilege. And saying this in front of Califano was seen as an obvious shot across Carter's bow. Mm-hmm. So by May 1979, Kennedy was openly challenging Carter to make healthcare a right for all people and propose his own bill. And this bill was different from his first one. He made room for health insurance companies because we can't have health insurance companies have their feelings hurt.
Oh, Lord.
So he makes what's called like a consortium. So 4 healthcare consortiums that you would choose from based on your employer. And then your employer would work out like a percentage premium. So this is kind of how like Japan does it. You pay a premium in Japan and it's based on your health insurance. So they would have companies pay for a little bit, you would pay for a little bit, and that would generate enough money that would get you, coverage would include unlimited hospital care and physician services, as well as laboratory services, x-rays, ambulance services, and medical equipment. There'd be limited payments for drugs, home care, nursing homes, and mental health. And the programs would not be voluntary. You would need to buy health care. So this was the major change that Kennedy was talking about. This is what he wanted passed. He wanted all those things covered as a human right. And if he had to change things to do it, he had to change things to do it. And I'm getting all this from a contemporary source. So this is from an article from the New York Times when Kennedy released it. Earlier, the talk about Nixon versus Kennedy's plan, that was from a Walter Cronkite Nightly News piece. And I think it's important to use these sources that way because I think you need to kind of put them in the context of how people were seeing them. Mm-hmm. So for us, today, we look at that and we're like, please, like sign me up.
Yeah, seriously.
But Kennedy struggled getting the support because people were kind of changing to being more conservative. A lot of people were skeptical of these old-timey Democrats and their programs that didn't really seem to fix anything. So Kennedy had an uphill battle. Carter ends up proposing that plan that I talked about earlier. Neither one of their plans pass. It gets very bitter. And it ends with 1979 turns into the Iran hostage affair. People's attitudes kind of shift away from healthcare, and the economy only gets worse. So having a giant healthcare program when the economy is getting worse and worse gets less and less popular. So support for it kind of dies out, and Kennedy decides to run against Carter. Carter, whose popularity was worse than Nixon's during Watergate at this time.
Wow.
So Kennedy thought he could win early on, but it gets pretty clear that his support was really kind of only in the Northeast because he had name recognition. And after Vietnam and Watergate and just this malaise everybody was in, Kennedy's name brought back this nostalgic feeling. So
I think I've brought this up before where the Kennedys are seen, I feel like they're American royalty at this point. They
really are.
Yeah.
They really do. As long as you have that name attached to you, you're going to have some sort of following. Right. You were an old-timey, prince or something like that.
Yeah.
You'll always have people who will be there for you and support you and want to give you power.
And it's funny because, the Kennedys at this point are as wealthy and as prevalent as they are, they're still seen as the underdog.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it, it has, one of them got, killed. And then
got smashinated.
Smashinated. And then another one got smashinated right after. And then, no, this wasn't until later, but one of them dies in a jet plane or...
I think that boosts the intrigue. Honestly, the tragedy boosts the intrigue.
Yeah. I'm surprised that no one has made a fucking Kennedy musical at this point.
Oh my god, the 3 acts could be the 3 of them dying.
Yeah.
And then RFK Jr. can be Phantom of the Opera. He just has a mask. Or his voice just goes over like the stage. I'm gonna get you.
No. No, well, he.
I think I do pretty good.
Well, he has like the little mask thing, and then like out of the corner of the eye, you just see a little worm.
Kill them all, Robert.
They're all autistic. Oh my god.
You have the whale's head. You're all powerful.
Oh.
I
That
know.
poor whale. God. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You know we have to make this musical now.
I
Right?
honestly, I'm trying to think of what we should call it. Because you know how like Henry VIII is like the Six. It's called Six.
Oh yeah.
And I was thinking like, where you know they have that song where it's like beheaded or no divorced, beheaded.
Oh yeah.
Whatever, I forget the other ones, but
Magic Bullet over Broadway.
oh my god. Maybe.
It's got
Promising.
It's
Got
got
potential.
potential.
Magic Bullet over Broadway. Or it was an inside job or something like that. I don't know. So it would be like the same kind of concepts where so it's like assassinated.
Died.
Plane accident.
Assassinated, crashed. Wait.
We have a pattern, I see.
Wait, lobotomized, crashed. Lobotomized, crashed, assassinated, crashed.
Damn.
We can do something with it.
Yeah, I mean, Lin-Manuel Miranda, if you're interested.
Oh, wait, no, I guess the first guy wasn't crashed, he blew up. Hey, that's a crazy
Anyways,
story.
yeah.
About Joe Jr.
Crazy.
So after Carter proposed his plan, the one we talked about earlier, the victim in this story, he gave a shot to Kennedy where he said, "We've heard speeches, testimony, and press conferences in support of national health insurance for 30 years, but not a single bill has passed the House or the Senate. The time has come for us to quit talking and get down to work." So what the ultimate argument comes down to is that it's better to have something than nothing. And I think for us now, we're like, oh, just I would have taken anything. But at the time, like national health insurance had been brought up for years. There's no reason to think that it would just stop being an issue. So their conflict deteriorates into them running against each other in 1980. Kennedy takes it all the way up to the convention, which is something else we don't see today. But we're not even sure if Kennedy was really running seriously. He had a terrible interview with this reporter named Roger Mudd. When Roger Mudd asks Kennedy, "Why do you want to be president?" he starts off the best way you can by going, "Well, and then it just kind of gets worse from there.
Oh, man.
He just kind of rambles on for 2 minutes. He doesn't really take his speeches that seriously. He starts some of his speeches in French for some random reason.
He's like, if you guys forgot that I'm rich.
Yeah, no.
Like, what?
It almost a little bit has that weird kind of feel to it, where it's just like,
pompous.
yeah, like, but he's like almost doing it like as a jab at him. It's very weird.
It's really weird.
I
bet you it's because Jimmy was, like Southern trash to him.
Ooh, maybe.
So he's like, you probably never even went to a proper school.
Yeah,
and I learned how to speak French, you peanut farmer.
A little bit like regional divides.
And that was all
class
said
divide.
in French.
I don't understand it. To me, it didn't seem like Kennedy knew he was going to lose, but it was kind of like an obligation that he needed to run. If he had never run, people probably would have it would have haunted him.
Yeah.
So he had to run at least once. This seems like the best chance he could have done it. But Chappaquiddick was still hanging over his head. And this was just like a different time. People didn't want somebody like Kennedy. They didn't want somebody with scandals. They didn't want all those things. And so Carter ends up winning, but Kennedy gives a speech at the end, and it's considered the best speech of his career. Where he goes, "For all those whose cares have been our concern, the work goes on, the cause endures, the hope still lives, and the dream shall never die." So I don't think Kennedy killed healthcare. I think he wanted something that would have made healthcare a human right, and I think he never saw what was going to come, which was where universal healthcare wouldn't be brought up again seriously until after he was dead. Mm-hmm. So I think you could accuse him of probably some hubris. I think what he wanted more than president was to be the person who solved healthcare for America.
Yeah.
I think he wanted to be seen as a serious person. Sorry, what?
Sorry. I keep having these, like, visions in my head where he's, like, to America, he's like, "I can be your hero, baby."
I think
he
that
has like a... I feel like a lot of these... Politicians, but even non-elected politicians, hint, wink, nudge, see themselves as, like, the savior. They want to be, like... the one that everyone looks to for the solution, and it's more nuanced than that.
It's almost all men on a sliding scale, because all men have had like the idea, like standing in line at a grocery store or at a convenience store. They're like, "Oh, somebody's gonna come in and rob this place, and I'm gonna grab the bag of Cheetos and throw it at his head, and then tackle him, and then be on the news." Like almost every single man I feel like has had
savior complex.
Yeah, some sort of savior complex. So it's on like a sliding scale, and if you've made it all the way up to this level of politics, your hero complex is probably way on the ramped up side of that scale. So I think that's what Kennedy wanted. I think he understood at this point that president was something he was never going to achieve. He was considered too liberal at the time. He had all those scandals in his past, but he could do this, and he could prove to his family that he was worthwhile and that he was not the screw up. And I think that's what he wanted more than anything.
He's just like a big little kid to me, in my mind. I see him as like, "I'm better than you think I am, Daddy."
Well, I would say like he grew up rich. It's a lot richer than Carter. But Carter's upbringing, I feel like, had like a lot more freedom to it. Like from Carter's upbringing, he had like a big farm, friends, a very stable kind of like life. Kennedy was a child when his family moved to England, and so he kind of had to make new friends in a new place and then move back from England.
Right.
And he was picked on by his family all the time. They called him fat all the time.
Oh, that's bean.
They called him fat and dumb. So like,
so he literally had something to prove.
He had something to prove.
Yeah, he had a complex.
And I think that's something that Carter like just could not understand. And I think Carter couldn't understand why he was being so like unreasonable and not practical. And we talk about like Rosalynn Carter. I think Rosalynn Carter would have been able to see that. And I think Rosalynn Carter would have had the instincts to use that personality trait in Kennedy. As opposed to Jimmy Carter, who looked at it with such a rigid point of view that he only saw Kennedy as some sort of nuisance or some sort of annoyance. Mm-hmm. Or, honestly, because he is a little arrogant, I think he kind of thought Kennedy was jealous of him and wanted his job.
Wow. And
I don't think that's the case. I don't think Kennedy killed healthcare, and I don't think he blocked that bill to make himself president. But he definitely did do it. He said that he would block any bill that was not for universal healthcare. So I think he tried to save healthcare by killing Carter's healthcare bill. But that bill was probably already dead. So, if I don't think Kennedy killed our chance at universal healthcare, who did?
I would like to know. Because I'm still waiting on that fucking healthcare.
So, the American Medical Association is hated today by a lot of conservatives for being woke. It's because they're pro-vaccine, they're pro-access to abortion, they're pro-trans rights, they're pro all the things that, I don't know, just make them woke. But it was actually started back in the 19th century as a way of young doctors and medical students to not kill themselves in duels.
Say what now?
So young medical doctors and a lot of medical students would kind of be like any of these young professionals and get really up in each other's business. And if they didn't think that they were worthy of practicing medicine or they had some sort of beef with them, they would get into duels. And this happened a lot, especially in the West and in the South. So after this had happened enough times, the American Medical Association got formed to basically give someone credibility. So it started off as like a secret fraternity, but then people started to like get really sketched out by secret fraternities, so they just made themselves a association. And it starts in the mid-19th century. By the late 19th century, early 20th century, when medical technology is starting to take off, the wealthy elites and robber barons of the times, your J.P. Morgans and your Rockefellers and stuff like that, saw a good investment, and so they bought up basically the AMA, and they were on the boards of a lot of medical universities. They were the ones that started to give out licenses, and when you give out licenses, you restrict the supply of doctors, and when you restrict the supply, you can increase the price. And this had devastating consequences, especially in non-white areas and rural areas, because obviously those doctors weren't the kind of people they were looking for. So the AMA continues supporting these doctors that they've now bought out. These doctors need a place to practice, so they get them spots in hospitals, and they need a product to sell, which is when pharmaceuticals start to take off. And all these organizations need their own sort of lobby to express their interest to the government. And the American Medical Association starts to form a very powerful lobby that in 1948 allies with a PR firm, which is called Whitaker and Baxter. And they became the first political PR firm in the country. And they came up with the idea of framing any sort of national health service as socialism, and it's losing your freedom and compulsory, because your politician's favorite politician, Harry Truman, surprised everybody and actually pushed for a universal healthcare system that Roosevelt was going to push for in his second Bill of Rights, or his Workers' Bill of Rights. Go home and Google that. But everybody thought Harry Truman was just going to be kind of a middle-of-the-road moderate, but he pushes for universal health care as a right for everyone. And he loses support in 1945. Republicans win the House and the Senate. We talked about this a few episodes ago. But in 1948, he's going to try to bring it back, and especially after he wins in 48. But the AMA starts their campaign of not only like distributing pamphlets that says like the voluntary way is the American way, and they try to get as many people as they could enrolled in healthcare programs as they can, especially Blue Shield, which was a healthcare for doctors that was started out in California. And they beta tested all this stuff in California, taking out a lot of acquaintance of the podcast Earl Warren's plans to make healthcare reform. And their long-term goal was ending any demand for universal healthcare. And they would buy up ads for other kind of companies. So like Walgreens would buy ads saying like the American way is the voluntary way, and clothing, if you wanted to buy a tractor. They also had their doctors. So if you were an AMA member, you were told to tell your patients not to support healthcare, not to support any universal healthcare, and to keep it private. And to keep it voluntary. And and they would, always bring up like the specter of communism and government takeover and all these things that made people not kind of support healthcare. And their other plan was to get as many people as they could signed up for private healthcare, so that they would just like forget about their basic human rights. Those were called like tie-in ads, those ads that they did with other folks. So like they just started a basically mass media campaign, a mass PR campaign to switch public support. And statistically, they did. Just by doing small little things like phrasing it as compulsory, you had like I think I saw a study that was like a 6 or 7% change in favorability. They also had Operation Coffee Cup.
Operation Coffee Cup.
Right. And then this was the program to encourage doctors to have a coffee with their patients to encourage them not to support even Medicaid.
Oh,
pardon me, even Medicare.
My God.
Though this was Kennedy's big push, was to have some sort of like Medicare program to help help people when they get old with their hospital bills. And Operation Coffee Cup had its own PR campaign, which included releasing. In 1961, they released an LP, and it's voiced by, you know him, you love him, star of Bedtime for Bonzo. Ronald Reagan.
Oh, I didn't see that coming.
He gives like a 10-minute speech just talking about how horrible socialized medicine is. And I forget what the name of the record is, but like this thing is like released all over the place. And it's a trip for back then. So it stokes all the fears and, basically tells people that like, no, you don't want healthcare taken care of you. You want a giant healthcare insurance company taking care of you. They opposed Medicare and Medicaid in 1965 because it would reduce the quality of care and it was un-American. They worked on this kind of thing, this reimbursement program. So basically, if a doctor billed health care, they didn't have to accept all of healthcare as their payment. They could accept healthcare as some of their payment and then charge their patient whatever they wanted. So suddenly, like a hip replacement surgery, since I'm getting it reimbursed from healthcare, isn't $1,000. It's $1,500. And then it's not $1,500. It's $2,000 now. So this makes healthcare costs soar. So that's kind of another misconception about like somebody like LBJ, who did all these great things, but he's known as the master of the Senate for a reason. And it's because he cut a lot of corners and compromised a lot to get these things passed. And a lot of them had unforeseen consequences. They offer their own healthcare bill because, fun thing that a lobbyist can do, lobbyists can write bills for you.
Oh my God.
So they have the National Insurance Act of 1971 that's supported by the Republicans and the conservative Southern Democrats.
Huh.
And that's kind of their tool. So I accuse the AMA of being the real murderer of healthcare.
They definitely were.
And I accuse the Southern Democrats of the time and some Republicans, but a lot of Southern Democrats were their accomplices. Like Russell Long, who was a member of the Senate from Louisiana, elected in the early 1960s. He was the Senate whip in the Russell Long was elected to the Senate from Louisiana in 1948. And if you're a Southern Democrat elected in 1948, probably a piece of shit. Yeah. Russell Long...
States rats.
States rats. He was a Senate whip in the 1960s. He wanted means tests for Medicare. So a means test is like basically they see if you really need it. They wanted to make sure that you're like poor enough to actually need health care. So they'd be like accusing your grandma and your grandpa, testing them to make sure that they actually needed their hips replaced or their cancer treatment. Or He's just this kind of like middle of the road garbage kind of guy who like hacked everything to death. He proposed a bill in 1971 that only covered catastrophic insurance, only for people under 65 that were covered by Social Security. He was the head of the Finance Committee in the 70s. So after after all those hearings on healthcare that Kennedy had, he had his own hearings and decided to support no healthcare reform. And so that basically left Kennedy on his own to fight for healthcare in the Democratic Party. After Kennedy and Carter had their feud in 1979, where none of their bills got passed, Long tried to swoop in and pass an even more conservative version of Carter's plan, where like you didn't need $2,500 wasn't like the max; it was like $4,000, and a lot of like just compromise after compromise after compromise, and it really is emblematic of Southern Democrats because universal health care would help black people. So having just access to health care quick and easy, not having to go through a private health care insurance, is always usually going to help the marginalized groups in your society, because that's what public social programs do. They help people that things like capitalism don't help. And there was also Robert Byrd, who was the Senate whip at the time, who was a member of the KKK. There was a Texas House of Representatives member who proposed a healthcare bill that was written by the National Health Insurance Association or something like that. Mm-hmm. So all these people kind of aligned against universal healthcare. These Southern Democrats at the time were just... It's hard to get across their mindset because it's basically gone. But like an example for Robert Long is that when Muhammad Ali wouldn't join the draft and wouldn't join the Vietnam fight, he said that he should be banned from any venue, or any venue that had him fight should be taxed 90%. And I don't know of any Southern politician that would even say the word tax now. But back then it was yeah, tax civil rights.
Oh my
tax
God.
anything I don't like.
Yikes.
So they think Joe Biden with busing in the 70s. These people were the ones that were making things happen. So this was the tool of health insurance and healthcare lobbies that was the one that really killed healthcare. So in the end, the AMA and people like Robert Long didn't have to destroy Kennedy or Carter's plan. They just had to outlast them. So healthcare had been stabbed, mutilated, until it was basically on its last legs in 1979, and they just needed to wait because help was on the way. An old friend was about to be elected president, and the healthcare lobby had completed their goal. After this, universal healthcare wouldn't be seriously proposed until Bernie Sanders. Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, they both focused on coverage, not care. Mm-hmm. When the ACA was passed in 2010, the general support of the healthcare lobby was there, but only after the bill was weakened. The public option was taken away. Fines were lowered for if you didn't have healthcare. Medicare couldn't negotiate drug prices. And that's the bill that we got. And that was the last thing that Ted Kennedy saw in healthcare reform before he died, was basically Nixon's deal. In 2020... even though most of the Democratic candidates supported universal health care, we got the one Southern Democrat senator from the 70s who didn't support universal health care. Who was besties with Strom Thurmond. Who is another... I know we're going to mention Strom Thurmond. Kennedy did a lot of deals with Strom Thurmond, and by the 1980s, he got Strom Thurmond's job as finance secretary. So, yeah.
What a legacy.
People were making deals with these monsters back then. Yeah. And it's...
Deal with the devil, literally.
It's come back to bite us in the ass for sure. Millions are still uninsured. America's life expectancy is years lower than its peers and is currently dropping.
Yay! I love history so much. I really do, though.
I do too.
It is really nice to see this has been a struggle that's been ongoing for a long time. It's not something that's new, even though it feels like it is new. It's something that we've been, trying to figure out for a long time in this country.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, it's Teddy Roosevelt proposed the National Health Service in 1912. It's something that used to be seriously proposed all the time, and we just kind of gave up on it.
It's just crazy to me that somehow healthcare became communist.
Yeah.
And, it was weaponized against us, and we were propagandized into thinking that helping people less fortunate that can't afford to be covered don't deserve help, that it's their own fault. It's just crazy that we've been propagandized so much as a country to just be yeah, well, maybe if Grandma Nancy wasn't so old and poor, she wouldn't be in the place that she's in. And it's she couldn't fucking help it, man. She was sick her whole life.
Well, we've seen this episode after episode, like civil rights is communist.
Yeah.
Being anti-apartheid is communist.
Yeah.
Now it's, wanting people not to die from not being able to afford healthcare is communist.
You know what I learned today?
What we learned today?
I learned today that in Germany, they teach students, grade school students, about American propaganda and how it's used. And they have, an entire textbook on it.
Really?
Yeah. Because, you know,
Learn from
our
the best.
propaganda doesn't stop here. It goes around the entire world.
No, it really does.
So they literally study it, and they teach students in Germany, like, see, this is what not to do.
See,
that's really sad.
Well, it's kind of the... In the end, this is just the problem with something like your health being attached to capitalism.
Yeah.
Because these people aren't going to be dumb with their... These people who have all this money aren't going to be dumb with their money.
Yeah.
They know that a little bit of propaganda can save them so much.
A little bit of propaganda
can go a long way. It really does.
Mm-hmm.
Like a few million in propaganda can save you billions by not switching over to a universal healthcare plan.
It's freaking crazy.
And
then when people start getting, you know, restless and angry, and they're just going to be like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so angry?
Yeah, they'll be shocked at the mess that they made.
Exactly.
Which is
what's
ridiculous.
happening right now.
Yeah.
We're in the FAFO stage. Not only with MAGA supporters, but with, you know, these healthcare companies that have been fucking shit up for Americans for years.
Yeah, it's definitely starting to come to a head.
Yeah.
And I think it's a situation that's taken a long enough hibernation, you know? I think we need to kind of have this attitude that we're going to settle for nothing less. And and I don't care what it is. I don't care whose plan it is. I just want healthcare to be a right that I don't have to worry is going to be there if I lose my job.
Right. So listen, I don't like the current administration. Not one goddamn bit. But if the current administration were to, I don't know, give us universal health care, I think I would have to concede at least a little bit and be like, well, at least they did that. Thank you. And then I would give credit where credit's due.
No, it's crazy how how bipartisan this used to be.
Yeah.
Like all those proposals, a lot of them were like supported by Republicans too. Kennedy had somebody support his bill who was in the Republican Party. It used to just not be a political thing. It was something that like, oh yeah, this makes sense. People should not die from being too poor to pay their hospital bills. People shouldn't go into massive amounts of debt because they had an accident. But somewhere along the way, we just got bought out. And just even the idea of universal health care has such a stigma against it.
Yep.
Well, what we should learn from this is that if somebody's saying something is communist, they usually have probably an ulterior motive.
Absolutely.
Because if you're calling something communist or socialist, then you're probably trying to scare somebody. Because the word is scarier than what it actually is. I promise you.
Yeah. You know, there's this thing called Google. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's free to use.
Amazingly.
It's a wonderful tool. We actually use it sometimes when we're doing our research. So, you know, research what communism is, research what socialism is, and come back to us in the comment section and let us know if it really is that evil. Anyway, to wrap it up, what did we learn?
Well, we learned that don't underestimate first ladies.
Yes, never underestimate a good first lady.
And
I think she listen. I don't want to ruffle any feathers, but I think Rosalynn would have gotten that healthcare bill passed.
Well, she got the healthcare bill passed. Isn't that crazy?
She did. She did. Yeah.
After all this drama llama that Kennedy and Carter, the drama llama that Kennedy and Carter started, and took to a very, very, if we're being honest, a little too emotional level, honestly. They were a little bit too in their feelings for this whole debate.
Yeah.
Rosalynn, being the cool, calm, rational one, actually got a healthcare bill passed to help mental health in 1980, in the height of this drama.
And then, of course, who comes in and ruins it? A man. Just saying.
How dare you? So, yeah. That's the Gipper, god damn it!
One thing you can take away is... do research on the first ladies and see what they were up to while their husband's political career was thriving, and see what they were working on. Because most likely you have no idea because they don't get as much coverage, but they are just as important and they do amazing, wonderful work. The healthcare problem has been a problem for a long time. We've been sold out a very long time ago, and who knows if it'll ever get better in this country. I hold out hope, but
I think something that we learned when you're studying this time period of history is you got to see the intimate relationship of white supremacy and capitalism. It's used to take away people's rights and have people go against their own self-interest over and over and over again. And that disgusting relationship, I think, is really what killed our chance of having even a decent healthcare system.
Yep. So on that fun note, well, no, another thing I wanted to bring up too is when you're doing, when you are hearing, like just like we did with Reagan, you want to look at the context of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Was Reagan a bad president overall? I think yes. A lot of the things that he did during his time in office, we're still seeing the ramifications of that in today's society. I would say tenfold.
Yeah.
So it's still nuanced, you know. There's a lot of things behind the scenes that you need to look at. But one of the things that you consistently hear from Republicans and Democrats is that, was Carter a good president? And the thing that I hear over and over and over again, consistently, is he was a bad president, but he was a good man. And listen, I don't know whether he was a good president or not. I know that he was hard to work with. I know that he was stubborn. I know that he was very hardworking. I know that he was a very good man. He had his head on his shoulders, and he wanted the betterment of society. He really did want the best for people. And you can see that after his political career, what he did with his name and his power. He did great things, right? Him and his wife. But you have to also realize he only had 4 years in office. Who knows what he could have done with another 4 years? And he took over after Vietnam.
Yeah.
We had been at war for a decade at this point. And obviously he's going to be taking over. I mean, longer than that, because Korea was just before that.
Yeah.
We didn't really have much of a period between that and then going right into Vietnam.
I think that Eisenhower had troops in Vietnam in like 1959.
Oh my God.
So it was probably...
There were five presidents spanned Vietnam, okay?
Yeah.
That's what you have to realize. So I think, you know, Jimmy Carter coming in directly after that, obviously shit's gonna not be great in this country. We spent billions of dollars to go and kill communism over in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Unsuccessfully, by the way. And, you know, obviously we were tired of the war at this point. So many presidents kept saying that they were going to leave the war, and then they came in and escalated the war. Kids were getting sent to go and kill other kids. Like, it was a horrible time. There was an energy crisis because of the war efforts. So when he takes over, you have to see the context of things. So was he a bad president? I think he was given a shit fucking economy. He was literally given a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
And nothing he did was gonna look well for him.
I think a lot of it too is like people did not trust the government.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's hard to do anything effectively when people don't trust you to do your job.
Right. And like, you know, he was seen as an anti-establishment at this time because of his, you know, his grassroots upbringing and all of that. But anyways, just everything is nuanced, y'all. Just look at the context. Try to view it from many different angles before you make your decision. And on that note, we're gonna end it here. And honey, I'll give you the honors.
The future is ahead of us.
Bye.
I mean,
I'll keep that in.